I never dreamed I would have to make a decision like this. A decision that felt like saying goodbye to her all over again. And I never thought I'd get a second chance at just living.
This is the story of how one mother's impossible loss gave another young woman a new beginning. It's about two lives, both shattered by tragedy, that became intertwined in a way no one could have ever imagined. The story you're about to hear is inspired by the real-life experiences of face transplant recipients and their donor families. To protect their privacy and weave together the common threads of these incredible journeys, we've created a composite narrative. The characters you'll meet, Chloe, Emily, and Sarah, are representative, but their journey reflects a profound truth about loss, generosity, and the very frontiers of medicine. For 22-year-old Chloe, life was an open road. She was vibrant, fiercely independent, and had just started her dream job as a landscape designer. Her friends called her sunshine, not just for her bright blonde hair, but for an energy that seemed to light up every room she entered. But that open road took a literal tragic turn one rainy Tuesday evening. A truck hydroplaned across the median. The sound of screeching tires and shattering glass was the last thing Chloe remembered before waking up to a world of muffled sounds and searing pain. The accident was catastrophic. She survived, but the impact had destroyed the central part of her face. Her nose, her jaw, her lips, her ability to smell, to eat properly, to smile, it was all gone in an instant. The person staring back from the hospital mirror was a stranger, a ghost. The Chloe who loved to laugh with her whole face, who'd meet friends for coffee without a second thought, was gone. In her place was a young woman who couldn't leave her home without facing stares of shock or pity. She endured dozens of reconstructive surgeries. Skin was grafted from her back and legs, bone from her hip. Each procedure was a mountain of hope that just crumbled into the same valley of disappointment. The results were minimal, and the outcome left her feeling less like a person and more like a patchwork of repairs. Her world shrank to the four walls of her parents' home. Social outings became panic-inducing ordeals. The simple act of eating was a frustrating, messy struggle. She mostly communicated with a whiteboard, her voice muffled and unclear. Loneliness was her constant companion. She was alive, but she wasn't living. She was trapped behind a mask of trauma, grieving the face that she'd lost and the life that was stolen along with it. Hundreds of miles away, another family was living their own version of a perfect life, completely unaware of Chloe's silent suffering. Sarah was a high school teacher, and her 21-year-old daughter, Emily, was her entire world. Emily was in her final year of college, studying to be a pediatric nurse. She was the kind of person who collected stray animals and spent her spring breaks volunteering. She had her mother's kind eyes and a laugh that could fill a house. Their life was measured in ordinary, beautiful moments. Sunday dinners, late-night calls about classes, planning a graduation trip. There was no warning, no time to prepare. One moment, Emily was in the library studying for her final exams. The next, she collapsed. A sudden, massive brain aneurysm. Sarah rushed to the hospital in a frantic, desperate drive filled with prayers. By the time she arrived, the doctors delivered the words that no parent should ever have to hear. Emily was brain dead. There was no brain activity, no chance of recovery. She was gone. The world tilted on its axis. The fluorescent lights of the ICU waiting room seemed to burn holes in Sarah's vision. The beeping of the machines keeping her daughter's body alive was a cruel metronome, counting down the seconds of a life that had already ended. How do you say goodbye to someone who is still warm to the touch? How do you process a future that's been erased in a single, silent, devastating moment? Sarah sat by her daughter's bedside, holding her hand, memorizing the shape of her fingers, the freckles on her nose, the curve of her cheek. She was drowning in a sea of grief so vast, she didn't know if she would ever find the surface again. And in that moment of profound darkness, a quiet knock came at the door. The person who entered the room was a transplant coordinator. She spoke with a gentle, practiced calm, but her words felt like they were from another planet. She talked about organ donation. Emily's heart, her lungs, her kidneys. These were ideas Sarah could grasp. A heart beating in someone else's chest, lungs drawing breath, a tangible continuation of life. And then the coordinator asked a question that seemed to stop time. It was a new, rare, and deeply personal request. She asked about donating Emily's face. Sarah's first reaction was a visceral, protective no. Her daughter's face? The face that she had kissed goodnight for 21 years? The one that held every smile, every tear? It was her identity. It was the face of her child. The thought of it on a stranger was horrifying, an unthinkable violation of her memory. Unlike internal organs, our face is tied to who we are, a visible symbol of our identity, and donor families often struggle with this, feeling it's just too personal to donate. But the coordinator with immense sensitivity explained. She told Sarah about a young woman nearby, a woman just a year older than Emily, whose life had been shattered in a car accident. A woman who couldn't eat, couldn't speak clearly, who was hidden from the world not by choice, but by her injuries. She had no quality of life. She had no hope left. The coordinator left Sarah with a folder and the space to think. For hours, Sarah sat with the deafening silence, broken only by the hum of the ventilator. She looked at her daughter, so vibrant just days before. Emily had always been a giver. She was the person who would stop to help anyone. She had proudly signed up to be an organ donor the day she got her driver's license, telling her mom, "If I can't use them, someone else should." This thought process is complex for donor families. It involves moving past the initial shock to see the donation as a way for their loved one to help others, a way for some part of them to live on. It could be Emily's final act of nursing, her ultimate gift of care. Slowly, painfully, an impossible decision began to take shape. It was a choice born from the deepest grief, a final, selfless act of love for her daughter. With tears streaming down her face, Sarah called the coordinator. She said yes. Back in her sterile room, Chloe Hope had worn thin. Years of painful, unsuccessful surgeries had left her exhausted. The world outside her window felt a million miles away. Then her doctors came to her with a radical proposition: a face transplant. At the time, the procedure was still highly experimental. Since the first partial transplant in 2005, only a few dozen had been performed worldwide. They explained everything in blunt detail. The surgery would be a marathon, incredibly complex, involving a huge team of surgeons working to connect bone, muscle, nerves, arteries, and veins. And the risks were monumental. Her body could violently reject the new tissue. She would have to take a cocktail of powerful immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of her life. Drugs that had their own serious side effects, including a higher risk of infection, kidney damage, and even cancer. There was a real chance the transplant could fail, leaving her in an even worse state, or it could cost her her life. Some studies show that on the order of 1 in 5 recipients has died from complications. But what was the alternative? A life in the shadows? A life of isolation and pain? For Chloe, the potential reward, the chance to feel the sun on her face, to eat a meal with her family, to walk down the street without being a spectacle, was worth the terrifying risk. It was a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. After long emotional conversations with her parents, who promised to support her through the brutal journey ahead, Chloe agreed. She was placed on the donation list. The wait was agonizing. It could be months, maybe even years to find a suitable donor. A match required not just the right blood type, but also a similar age, gender, ethnicity, and skin tone. Chloe tried not to think about the grim reality of it all. For her to get a chance at life, someone else had to lose theirs. It was a heavy, complicated weight to carry. Then, a few months later, the call came. A donor had been found. A young woman. A perfect match. Chloe had to get to the hospital immediately.
The moment the call came, two worlds collided in a symphony of organized chaos. At the hospital, a massive team of surgeons and dozens of other medical staff began to assemble. 2 operating rooms were prepped. In one, a team would work on Chloe, carefully preparing the nerves and blood vessels that would receive the gift. In the other, a separate team would work with the utmost respect and precision to procure the donation from Emily. The procedure itself was a marvel of modern medicine. This isn't like putting on a mask. The surgeons weren't just transplanting skin. They were transplanting a single living piece of composite tissue, a vascularized composite allograft, or VCA, which included the underlying muscle, nerves, and blood vessels. For over 24 hours, the surgical teams worked. Under powerful microscopes, they painstakingly stitched tiny arteries and veins together, restoring blood flow to the donated tissue. They aligned and connected nerves, the crucial pathways that would hopefully one day let Chloe feel and smile again. It was a delicate, high-stakes dance of immense skill. Every single connection had to be perfect. While the surgeons worked, Sarah waited. The hospital had given her a private room away from the surgical floor. She paced, she tried to read, she looked through old photos of Emily on her phone. Every hour that passed was a mix of sorrow for her own loss and a fragile, budding hope for this other girl, this stranger whose life was now forever linked to hers. Donor families often find a sense of comfort knowing their loved one's final act had a positive impact even in the midst of their own grief. When Chloe woke up, she was in a fog. Her head was wrapped in thick bandages, her face swollen and foreign. The first few weeks were a blur of pain management, medical checks, and the constant humming anxiety. Would her body accept the gift? The risk of the body attacking the new tissue is highest in the first few months, a critical and dangerous period. The psychological journey was just as intense. She was grieving her old face while trying to accept a new one that belonged to a stranger who had died. This is one of the most significant challenges for recipients. Who was she now? Then the day came. The mirror moment. The bandages had been off for a few days, and the worst of the swelling had started to subside. A psychologist and her parents stood with her as a nurse held up a simple, handheld mirror. Her hands trembled as she took it. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and then looked. Tears streamed down her cheeks. It wasn't her old face, but it wasn't the face of a stranger either. Because of Chloe's own underlying bone structure, the face in the mirror was someone new. It was her, a whole person. She had a nose, she had lips, she had cheeks. She traced the jawline, a jawline that could now chew. She touched her lips, lips that could one day form a real smile. For the first time in years, the reflection staring back wasn't a reminder of what she had lost. It was a promise of everything she had to gain. The road to recovery was long. It involved months of intensive therapy to relearn how to speak, chew, and make facial expressions. At first, the movements were clumsy, but slowly, with incredible determination, the nerves began to regenerate. A twitch in her cheek, a slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. Each tiny flicker of movement was a monumental victory. Studies consistently show that for many recipients, a face transplant leads to a dramatic improvement in quality of life and social integration. Chloe began to reclaim her life piece by piece. She went for a walk in the park, feeling the breeze on her cheeks. She sat in a coffee shop and ordered a latte, speaking the words clearly. She ate a slice of pizza, savoring every single bite.
These were small, ordinary moments that felt like absolute miracles. Of course, the journey wasn't without its challenges. She had to manage a strict regimen of immunosuppressant drugs, always aware of the risk of infection. She had a few rejection scares, which were terrifying but successfully managed by her team. The reality of a transplant is that it's a lifelong condition, not a one-time cure. But for Chloe, the challenges were a small price to pay for the life she'd been given back. She was no longer a victim. She was a pioneer. This incredible journey is made possible by two things: groundbreaking medical science and the profound generosity of organ donors and their families. If this story moves you, please consider learning more about the powerful impact of organ and tissue donation. There's a link in the description that can give you information on how to register as a donor and give the gift of life. And if you want to see more stories about human resilience and the medical marvels changing our world, please subscribe to our channel. A year and a half after the transplant, Chloe and Sarah began to exchange letters, anonymously at first, through the transplant organization. Sarah wrote about Emily, not her death, but her life. She shared stories of Emily's kindness, her goofy sense of humor, her dream of becoming a nurse. Chloe wrote about her recovery, her firsts, the first time she smiled, the first time she laughed without covering her mouth, the first meal she truly tasted. She poured her immense gratitude onto the page, trying to find words for a priceless gift. Through their letters, a unique and powerful bond began to form. Finally, they both expressed a desire to meet. These meetings are rare and only happen when both the recipient and the donor family mutually agree and are emotionally prepared. The transplant center helped facilitate it, ensuring psychologists were there to support them. They decided to meet in a quiet, private room at the hospital. When Sarah walked in, she saw Chloe standing by the window. For a moment, her breath caught. She could see faint echoes of Emily, the curve of the cheek, the shape of the nose, but the person standing before her was not her daughter. It was Chloe. Her eyes, her spirit, her personality, they all shone through. Chloe stepped forward, her heart pounding. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you is just not a big enough word." Sarah just shook her head, her own eyes filling with tears. She said softly, "You don't have to say anything." She reached out and gently, tentatively, touched Chloe's cheek. It was a moment suspended in time. For Chloe, it was the touch of the woman who had given her a future. For Sarah, it was a way of connecting with her daughter's final, beautiful legacy. They embraced, a long, heartfelt hug that said more than words ever could. It was an embrace of grief, gratitude, and healing. They sat and talked for hours. Chloe showed Sarah photos of her life before the accident. Sarah brought a photo album of Emily as a baby, at her prom, on a family vacation. She wanted Chloe to know the person's gift she carried. Sarah found a strange and beautiful peace in that meeting. Seeing Chloe, so vibrant and full of life, didn't erase her grief, but it gave it a new dimension. It was confirmation that her impossible choice had been the right one. It provided a sense of comfort, seeing the tangible, positive outcome of the donation. Emily's life, though tragically short, had created this incredible ripple of hope. A part of her lived on, not just in memory, but in Chloe's laughter, in her smile, in her ability to live a full life. The story of Chloe, Emily, and Sarah is more than a medical marvel. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the extraordinary power of generosity. It shows that for a procedure like this, the emotional and psychological journey is just as important as the surgical success. It reminds us that from the ashes of an unspeakable tragedy, hope can be reborn, and that in the face of profound loss, a mother's love can transcend death itself to offer the most incredible gift of all, the gift of a new life. Chloe's journey is far from over. It's a path she will walk for the rest of her days, a life she will never take for granted. As Chloe herself said in one of her letters to Sarah, "Every morning I look in the mirror. I don't just look at a new face. I see a new day.
I see a new chance, and I promise to live a life that is worthy of the incredible sacrifice that made it possible.